Have you ever noticed that sometimes you find a challenge in a relationship with someone and you'll say to them, I notice you have a tendency to do this, or maybe you do that, or I find that you're curt with people, you don't smile when you talk, or any litany of things that you notice about someone else. And when you point it out to them, they get a little bit offended. Maybe they get a little defensive, and they get defensive and they feel like you're attacking them. And so they come right back at you. And normally they come back with what? They come back with, well, so are you. Now, there's a psychological phenomenon that makes that true. And it's the reason that every leader should look really hard at themselves before they criticize anybody else. And I don't just mean in the leadership role, I mean any human relationship that you have. And that's what we want to talk about today on Leading Leaders. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders podcast, and maybe you've heard that old phrase from kindergarten, it takes one to know one. Remember that? It takes one to know one. Somebody would say, oh, you're fat. Well, it takes one to know one. You know, a fat person knows a fat person. A mean person knows a mean person. Why? Well, because they're so familiar with the behaviors. They're so familiar with the way that that person thinks and talks and acts. And so it's real easy to spot one. In leadership today, instead of calling each other fat or mean, we might just simply say, you're a narcissist. Well, maybe the old idea still holds true. It takes one to know one. Is it possible that you recognize someone else's faults and flaws because you possess them? I mean, it's possible, right? Maybe you find yourself so willing to criticize someone else's ideas, their behavior, their thoughts, their relationship patterns, because you have them. Because you tend to act just like that. If that's the case, then maybe you need to spend a little more time looking in the mirror and asking yourself what faults, what flaws, what bad ideas, what relationship habits do I have that need to be addressed. Maybe as a tool, you could make note of the things about other people that annoy the living daylights out of you. You know, the way they drive, the way they cut people off in traffic, the way they try to finish other people's sentences. I find it fascinating when people do that. I do have a tendency to think really fast. So in conversation, sometimes I will have a pretty good idea where somebody's going with a thought long before they develop and express it. Now, on a rare occasion, and I don't say that to be egotistical, but on a rare occasion, I'll be wrong with their idea, their train of thought. I'll have a pretty good idea where they're going with that, and then like comedy or something, they take a wild left turn and they're on an exit headed down another highway, and I had no idea that was coming. But that's on a rare occasion. That's different from the person that tries to predict my every sentence, and sometimes I have fun with it because I do think fairly fast. I get that person that as I'm finishing a word, they'll say the same word with me as I finish the word. Yeah. And so it's almost like they're trying to confirm that they know what I'm about to say or what I've already thought, and that they're going to end my thought so they can move on to something else. And that drives me bonkers. That causes me, though, to ask the question, do you cut people off in the middle of their thought? Do you let them finish their thought? Do you let them finish processing? Now, part of God's way of disciplining me in this arena is that I married someone 27 plus years ago who I wouldn't say is not a thinker. She's just a processor. She thinks very deliberately, very thoroughly about everything, and every answer comes after great pause and deliberation. There's no answer that's rushed into. There's no knee-jerk reaction to everything. I challenge you, if you know her, to ask her, what are you thinking? And her eyes will roll back in her head for a moment, and then she'll say, nothing. I don't think it's possible to think nothing, although most guys would tell you that. But I don't think it's thinking nothing. I just think it's, is there anything that I'm thinking right now that is worthy of a conversation between us? Or is what's going on in my head really not worth bringing up at this point? Or is it something that I'm still thinking through? I do know for a fact that I've asked her questions that, no exaggeration, days later, out of nowhere, I'll get this phrase, this sentence, this grand conclusion, and it's an answer to a question that I asked days ago. And I'm thinking to myself, have you been thinking on the answer all this time, or have you been mulling through the other potential answers, or did you just forget that I asked the question and it just now dawned on you? And the truth of the matter is, she's just a very deliberate person. She's working on a new degree program. She's already got one degree. She's working on a second degree. And as she's working on that degree, she had a class that she felt like, maybe I don't need to take this. I thought I'd already taken it. I thought I had credit for this from my previous degree, but they're not showing the credit. I started it and then I got interrupted, and now I'm going to have to go back and start it over again. Maybe they'll let me test out of it. Now, mind you, she finished her degree program before we were married and had 4 kids. She tested out of the program in less than a day. She missed 3. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive. It tells me I didn't marry an unsmart person. I didn't marry an unthinking person. I just married a person who thinks in a different pattern, in a different pathway than I do. So as a leader, that challenged me to say, in these conversations that I have with other people, strangers, or whether it's an intellectual debate or a high-level conversation or a leadership training, do I find myself habitually trying to outthink them? Am I thinking faster, communicating faster, and am I, in their eyes, being intimidating? Bullying them? Am I pounding it into their head? Because my ideas in my head come very fast. And I usually express them as fast as they come. And sometimes, because my brain also thinks in the world of connectedness, if you've ever studied Strength Finders, that's not just relationships, it's also random thoughts. And my brain takes these, what seem to be random thoughts, and connects them together and finds the interrelatability of those facts. They seem detached ideas. They seem like there's no way point A and point B are attached to each other, but my brain finds the way they're connected and then processes through it very quickly. And so I can draw conclusions from disparate facts pretty easily. I'm married to a person who takes those facts and that data and analyzes it and processes it factually, historically, educationally, materially, and emotionally, and then gives you an answer. And sometimes I feel like I'm leaning over the edge of the Grand Canyon waiting for a reply, only to find that I need to calm down, slow down, back up, wait, go get a cup of coffee, and come back to this conversation. Now, if you find yourself as a leader critical of that person who doesn't think like you think, who doesn't communicate like you communicate, maybe not nearly as often or nearly as fast or nearly as loud or nearly as passionate, ask yourself, honestly, am I the leader who's making the mistake? Or if you find that person that kind of matches you wit for wit, and you speak both as fast and both as deliberate and both as broad on topics as the other, and you find yourself constantly maybe butting heads or challenging each other's ideas, or one skipping ahead to say, I've already come to the conclusion, let's just move on, but you haven't fully developed the idea. I do have friends like that as well. Mike Arnold is one of those. Mike Arnold is one of those guys that when we have intellectual debates, there was a time that we had an intellectual debate. This has been many years ago now. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, we got into the argument of who's smarter. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, we went online, found an online IQ test. We both logged in, signed up, and took the same IQ test at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll let you ask him about the results. It was kind of comical. But the conversations that we have, we think a lot alike. We've studied a lot of the same material. We have similar, but not the same, kinds of backgrounds, family relationships, geography we grew up in, the whole thing. but we are two vastly different people. And the way we come to conclusions is vastly different. Now, if you're a leader and you find yourself in those relationships that they put the pressure on you to think like someone else, to think outside the box, they cause you to realize that the habits, the methodology, the pace that you think with and that you communicate with, well, they may not be for everyone. Before you criticize the other person for the style of their communication or the pace of their learning or the pace of their expression, ask yourself, could I fix mine? Could I be better at what I do? Could I be a better person in the way that I communicate? Could I slow down and give them more grace? Could I maybe study their background a little bit better so that I can communicate to them and with them at a pace that's more conducive to them? Now, we also realize that that's not just in communication styles. Sometimes it's in genuine relationship styles. It's in the way that we interact with people. For an example, I have the habit of opening the door, not just for my spouse, but for anybody that I feel like is going through the same door. I will wait sometimes 5 or 10 seconds, standing at the door, holding it open, waiting for somebody to open it. I don't take offense if somebody else holds the door for me, but I know that there are those people that while I'm holding the door for them, they'll walk through the door and intentionally push it far enough that it's out of my hand and out of my control to make sure that they have opened their own door. I don't understand what that's about. Maybe it's about having been discriminated against in the past. I don't know. I find it odd, though, but it's a unique relationship skill, right? I also find it odd when I see someone go out a door and immediately let it close behind them. I was walking into a 7-Eleven the other day. Lady's coming out. She's got 4 Slurpees and a cup of coffee. She's kind of making her way. The young man in front of us, because we're all three trying to go out the door at the same time, the young man in front of us pushes the door open and then squeezes through a very small opening and lets the door smack back. It almost knocked the Slurpees all over the lady. I reached over her shoulder. Fortunately, she was short. I reached over her shoulder, pushed the door open for her, and she looked at me as if to say, why didn't he not think of that? Why didn't he put his foot in front of the door? I can't answer that question, but I'm glad I was there to hold the door for her. Otherwise, we would have had Slurpee and coffee all over the floor and people could have been falling in it. But I can't condemn his desire to squeeze out the door. Maybe it's his own little, I don't know, maybe he's OCD. Maybe he's a germaphobe. He doesn't really want to touch the door because so many other people have touched the door. Maybe he just wanted to squeeze through that little passage so as not to touch anything other people have touched. I don't know the answer to that. But to criticize him simply for not holding the door for somebody else without asking myself, is there any way that I could possibly understand where he's coming from? Well, that would be judgment. You follow me so far? See, we as leaders, we have a tendency to think fast, to move fast, to take action. That's what leaders do. That's what defines us oftentimes as leaders, is that we think fast, move fast, take action. We do what's got to be done. We don't wait for everybody else. And sometimes that's exactly the problem, that we need to slow down, wait for everybody else, give them a moment to catch up, not judge them, but maybe be more self-aware of our own idiosyncrasies and habits and ways of doing things and how those might actually drive other people bonkers as well. Maybe there are other people that look at our speed of life, our action orientation, our willingness to just get the job done regardless of what it takes, and think, why don't you just slow down and put your feet up for a minute, grab a good book and find a recliner or a rocking chair or a porch swing and just chill? Why can't you just chill? I have a good friend, one of my mentors. He and I have known each other, I guess now 11 years this year. And in one of our conversations, he was telling me that he and his wife are very different, like my wife and I are. And he said, if I went to the beach, I'd have 3 books and my laptop, and I'd be writing and planning and executing and thinking through the next board meetings and all of these different things that I need to get done in my life. Even at the beach where it's relaxing and there's nobody bothering me and my cell phone's not ringing, I could be extremely productive. And she gets offended that I don't just want to put my feet up and watch the waves and listen to the waves come in and enjoy some little drink with an umbrella in the top of it. And it bugs her that I can't relax like that. Then it bugs me that she doesn't get anything done. And I thought to myself, it sounds like you're both kind of judging each other. But that was kind of the point of our conversation as we were just expressing our own self-awareness, coming to the place where we look at ourselves pretty hard and say, how could I be better at what I do? How can I lower the expectations that I have of others and raise the expectations of myself? Maybe it's the words that I use. I had a conversation with someone yesterday, and I pointed out that one of the big communication gaps for a lot of people is using a word that really isn't the word. Maybe other people have used it in a sentence, in a phrase, in a comment. It's not the word that belongs there. The pandemic has brought up the use of a common phrase, underlying conditions. Underlying, meaning those things in the background, those things beneath the surface, like immune diseases or past illnesses or things of that nature that would cause an infection to become a life-threatening event. But I can't tell you how many people from the media to just other leaders that I've heard not use the word underlying, meaning beneath the surface, but underlining. Well, that's what an editor does to the first draft of your book. That's what your English teacher does. That's underlining might be a way to highlight or emphasize something, but it's not underlying. And so it's easy for somebody to misstate and say underlining versus underlying. Most people presume that they know what that means and they just let it go. There are those who we would consider grammar aficionados who would be very adamant to stop you in the middle of that sentence and back you up and correct you. Now, I might do it as an editor. I might do it for a customer or a client who is working on writing a speech. If I see them actually write that word in, or I hear them in the rehearsal use the word underlying or underlining interchangeably, because I know people who have, in the course of one speech, used both words, underlying and underlining. And I'll correct them for that, because the preciseness of your speech is pretty important. But that can be just the way that you've heard it, or the way that you think about it, or the fact that you haven't taken the time to think about the word and what it means and how it fits in the sentence. We can easily judge that, right? But are we judging somebody's ability to deliver, their understanding of vocabulary, their use of the English language, or are we judging their thinking process? If that one word allows us as a leader, or as a customer, or just as a hearer, to make a presumption about their ability to think, their intellectual capacity, their level of education, then we need to take a hard look at ourselves and say, why are you so critical? Why are you judging them on that one word out of the context of everything else that they've had to say? Does it say more about them being pedantic and arrogant, or does it say more about you? My challenge for you today as leaders is, as you come to the thought of someone else's critiquable concepts, their behavior, the words they use, their relational skills, as that crosses your mind and you think, oh, it just drives me crazy when people do that, make note of it. In fact, yes, I know I stepped out from in front of the camera. This is a book that I wrote. This is my first book. This one's 10 years old this year. Live a More Excellent Life actually has an entire chapter about how to use sticky notes to become more self-aware. And it says, use a sticky note, and whether it's in traffic or it's in the classroom or it's in the boardroom or it's in a conference, when someone does something that just makes you crazy, write it down and circle it in red, because here's the chance. You are already doing that or something very similar to it, something equally annoying to the rest of the world. And if that's the case, then the chances are the rest of the world would like you to get rid of that habit as much as you would like that individual to get rid of it. Now, here's the beauty of it. You can do this anonymously. Nobody has to know that you're making note of their habits that make you crazy, because you probably need to analyze yourself and get that habit out of your own life. You're aware of it because you do it. As you see other people do it, just make note of it and then think to yourself, wow, that's really annoying maybe I do that. Maybe it's really annoying to others too, and I can fix it. If you see people who have a habit that's really good, make note of that too. Maybe write that one in green instead of red, so you can think to yourself, I really like the way they manage their diet or take care of others or open the door for strangers. I should take on that habit. I should begin to do that because I don't now. Again, make note of it. Adopt it. Practice it. After 63 days, it will become the new you. That's a really good way to become a better leader. So I challenge you, when you see something annoying in somebody else, ask yourself, am I taking a hard enough look at me? Is that problem really my problem, and that's why it bugs me? And before you criticize or judge somebody else, fix it in you first. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.